They buried the truth under centuries of silence. But silence cannot hold back a scream forever. Imagine a house where every mirror was covered, not to mourn the dead, but to keep the living from seeing what time had done to their own reflection. Imagine standing in that house and realizing the faces staring back at you were the same as they were 170 years ago. If you feel a chill already, pause, breathe, and lean closer, because what I'm about to tell you is not a ghost story. It is a historical wound that bleeds through paper, court records, whispered testimonies, and abandoned photographs. If you're watching this now, hit like, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from, because stories like this spread in whispers, not broadcasts, and those who carry them forward become part of the chain. The Dalton sisters were born in Georgia, mid-19th century, a time when America's soil was drenched in war, superstition, and quiet cruelty. They were children when the Civil War broke out, but history remembers them not as survivors, not as brides, not as mothers, but as something far more disturbing. People called them America's eternal mystery. Neighbors swore the girls never grew old. First as a whisper, then as a local obsession, then as a warning to travelers, their existence unsettled an entire community. But before they became symbols of terror, they were flesh and blood. Mary Dalton, the eldest, was known for her piercing green eyes that seemed too sharp for her age. Eliza, the middle sister, carried a voice so soft and haunting that people claimed hearing her sing felt like standing in a church with no altar. And Ruth, the youngest, possessed a beauty that unnerved even those who loved her. She was described as too perfect, like something carved rather than born. The sisters lived in a house their father built with wood hauled from a forgotten churchyard. Wood that had once stood as pews where prayers rose, now hammered into walls where secrets would rot. By the year 1870, every other family in the town had changed, aged, moved, or passed on. Yet the Dalton sisters appeared untouched. Photographs, taken decades apart, showed the same faces. Farmers whispered that they never saw the sisters shop for food, yet the garden was always full, and at night the smell of bread drifted from their chimney. Clergymen tried to dismiss the rumors, until one priest confessed in writing that when he visited the Dalton home, he heard voices chanting in a language he could not recognize, and the sisters standing around their mother's rocking chair, though she had been dead for 20 years. What makes this story worse is not the sisters' beauty, nor their strangeness, but the trail of disappearances that shadowed them, starting with children, then brides, then whole wedding parties. 41 women vanished on their wedding night within a radius of only a few towns, every last one seen alive near the Dalton property. And yet no charge ever stuck. Records were burned. Testimonies disappeared. Sheriffs who pushed too hard died in hunting accidents. There is something more horrifying than death, something buried in the American soil, and the Dalton sisters were its gatekeepers. This is not folklore. This is not a cautionary tale. This is history carved into obituaries, stitched into missing person posters, and locked in courthouse basements. You are about to walk into their house, sit in their parlor, and feel the weight of eternity pressing against your skin. But be warned, once you enter, the doors may never fully open again. The first documented case came in 1852, the year the war had not yet touched Georgia's hills, but the whispers already had. A young bride named Anna Mae Pritchard vanished hours after her wedding. Guests remembered her leaving the church in a white dress, candlelight trailing behind her, and walking toward her new home. She never arrived. Search parties scoured the woods, rivers, and fields. No blood, no footprints, no torn fabric. Only one thing was found, a ribbon from her hair caught on the fence outside the Dalton property. The Dalton sisters claimed innocence, but neighbors swore they saw Mary Dalton watching from an upstairs window, smiling faintly as though she already knew the ending. The case was dismissed, but less than a year later, another bride disappeared, then another. Soon, the number grew too high to call coincidence. Families wept, men cursed, but no authority dared confront the sisters. Why? Because those who did often met fates worse than the missing women. One sheriff in 1855 gathered a posse and marched up to the Dalton estate, demanding to search the house. Witnesses say the sisters welcomed them, opening every door, every room, offering tea with unsettling courtesy. The sheriff returned pale, shaking, and a week later was found hanging in his barn, his lips torn and his eyes gone. His death was ruled suicide, though the townsfolk whispered otherwise. What was in that house? Those who entered claimed it smelled faintly of lavender and blood. They said the walls felt too close, as though the house itself breathed. And then there were the mirrors, every single one covered in black cloth. When asked, Ruth Dalton said, "We don't need to see what we already know." By the time the war ended, the sisters should have been women in their 40s. Yet photographs from 1871, preserved in brittle albums, show them unchanged, flawless, with not a wrinkle or blemish. Reporters came from distant states, hungry for scandal, but many who wrote about them ended their lives in silence. One journalist in particular, Thomas Greaves, penned a series of articles about the disappearances. His final piece described the Dalton sisters' parlor as a room where time itself seemed held in chains. Days after printing those words, he was found dead in his office, his watch frozen at midnight, though it still ticked. This is where history bends, because as the nation rebuilt from war, the Dalton sisters became less human and more mythic, yet their presence was recorded on paper, in ink, in photographs you can still see. They became a scar on the land, the kind people glance at and then quickly look away. Some called them witches, others called them demons, and still others whispered that they were the guardians of an older bargain, a covenant America itself inherited from the soil of forgotten tribes and the rituals of Europe's darkest nights. And if that is true, then the missing brides were not victims of chance, but offerings. And the Dalton sisters were not murderers, but priests of something that still waits beneath the ground, hungry. The pattern of disappearances is too precise to ignore. 41 brides, each vanishing on the night of vows, between 1852 and 1894. The number is biblical, ritualistic. 40 days in the desert, 40 nights of flood, and one more to seal the chain. Historians today dismiss the stories as exaggeration, but town records confirm the missing names. 41 graves with no bodies, 41 families torn apart, and always the Dalton sisters at the periphery, like shadows that never move. Some researchers believe the sisters were part of a ritual known as the white marriage, an unholy inversion of the wedding ceremony where the bride is offered not to her husband, but to something else entirely. In European grimoires, there are descriptions of processions of veiled women led into forests, their laughter turning into screams as the ground opened beneath them. The Dalton estate stood near a ridge where the Cherokee once performed ceremonies of binding and release. Some claim the sisters learned from what was left behind when blood and earth were mixed in conquest. One chilling account survives from a survivor, a woman named Margaret Clay. She too was a bride in 1879, and on her wedding night, she vanished for 3 days. When she reappeared, disoriented, barefoot, and mute, her dress was shredded and her hair streaked white, though she was only 19. Years later, she spoke, haltingly, about what she remembered. She said the Dalton sisters led her into a candlelit room, circled her, and sang in a language that broke her ears. She said she saw her own body on the floor, pale and motionless, while something climbed out of it wearing her face. When she awoke, she was back on the roadside, her new husband gone forever. She lived the rest of her life half insane, whispering that the sisters kept her double. This testimony was buried in a courthouse file, mislabeled as delirium. But the story has survived because fragments surface again and again. Doctors who examined Margaret claimed her pulse was irregular. Her reflection moved slower than her body, and she never aged beyond her 30s. She died at 78 with the face of a woman half her age. If her words were true, then the Dalton sisters' power was not in stealing youth, but in trading places, keeping themselves young by trapping others in endless decay. And what of the missing 41 brides? Perhaps they were not devoured, but copied, their lives worn like garments by women who refused to let time claim them. By the 1890s, whispers had turned into outright dread. The Dalton estate was avoided, the sisters seen less and less, yet always exactly the same. Farmers swore that their livestock grew sick if they grazed too close to the Dalton fields. Women claimed that their dreams were haunted by three figures in white, standing at the foot of their beds, whispering offers of eternal beauty if only they would surrender the night. In 1894, the last recorded bride vanished. After her disappearance, the sisters seemed to withdraw entirely from public life. But rumors spread of midnight gatherings at the estate. Neighbors described lines of carriages arriving in the dark, guests cloaked in black, disappearing inside the house until dawn. What happened in those gatherings is unknown, but fragments suggest powerful men, judges, businessmen, even preachers attended. Some claimed the Dalton sisters had become priestesses for a cult of the elite, feeding them secrets older than the nation itself. Here lies the greatest horror, that what began as whispers of three strange women became a network of power, cloaked in marriage veils and blood. That the missing brides were not only sacrifices, but currency in a transaction between flesh and influence. That America's very institutions, courts, and churches alike, bent to the silent will of three women who never aged. Newspapers of the time stopped reporting on the Dalton sisters entirely. Court records vanish after 1895. And yet, photographs survive. One in particular, dated 1906, showing the sisters standing at a fairground, indistinguishable from how they looked in 1852. Smiling faintly, untouched by years, their eyes reflecting nothing but void. The photograph was rediscovered in the 1970s, sparking renewed interest, but even then, researchers went missing. If they survived, where did they go? If they died, where are their graves? No record of burial exists. Their house was abandoned by 1912, burned in a suspicious fire, leaving only stone steps leading nowhere. But the story did not end with ashes. Because to this day, travelers claim to see three women walking the roadside near where the house once stood, in white dresses, carrying no shadow, their faces perfect, their eyes too sharp. Here is the detail that makes the skin crawl. In 1977, a construction crew digging near the Dalton estate unearthed a sealed trunk. Inside were garments, wedding dresses, 41 of them, yellowed with age but intact. Each one stained faintly at the neckline, as though kissed by something dark. Alongside them were pages written in delicate handwriting, signed by Mary Dalton. The words are fragmented, but they read like invocations. Phrases about binding, about exchanging skin, about the eternal hour where the bride meets not her groom, but the mirror. Scholars who reviewed the writings disagreed on their authenticity, but the trunk was real. The dresses were real. They were cataloged, then vanished from archives, never displayed. Officials claimed water damage destroyed them, but employees whispered that federal agents removed them in the night. Why? Because even fabric can carry memory, and the Dalton memory was not meant to breathe again. Some claim the sisters' legacy survives not in blood, but in institutions. That certain fraternities, certain societies, still perform the white marriage behind closed doors. That the promise of eternal youth, of never aging, still lures men and women into secret pacts. That the Dalton sisters were only the first to succeed where countless failed, to where beauty is armor against the inevitable. And yet, if they never died, then they're still out there. Somewhere. Perfect faces in the crowd. Eyes too sharp. Smiles that do not reach the skin. Perhaps even watching this very story now, wondering which of you listening will recognize them. The question is not whether the Dalton sisters defied time. The question is what price they paid, and what price was demanded of those around them. Because every secret has a cost, and the 41 brides still wait beneath the soil, calling for someone to listen. And you're listening. You cannot turn back now. The story darkens when you begin to realize the Dalton mystery was never confined to one family. History repeats itself in whispers, and across the world we see echoes, 3 women, unchanging, bound to vanishings that no authority can explain. In Eastern Europe, entire villages once spoke of the White Daughters, pale sisters who appeared in times of famine and left behind silence where brides once stood. In South America, Spanish colonists recorded the tale of the novias de sangre, the blood brides, who never aged and always collected a price from newly married women. Could the Dalton sisters have been merely the American incarnation of something older, something imported with the ships, the prayers, the blood, and the curses? When the first European settlers arrived, they brought not only tools and Bibles, but rituals they pretended to abandon. Burial practices warped into quiet midnight ceremonies. Marriage vows warped into pacts whispered under the guise of Christian rites. The soil drank all of it. The Cherokee who once roamed those Georgia hills already believed the land held spirits that demanded balance. When the settlers forced their own ceremonies onto that land, the balance shattered, and in the fracture something seeped through. The Dalton sisters may have been children of this fracture, not born supernatural, but transformed by standing too close to the wound. One theory, passed secretly between historians, suggests their mother was the true beginning. Records indicate Mrs. Dalton attended a forbidden convent gathering in Savannah before giving birth to her daughters. That convent was closed in 1837 after accusations of unholy practices, yet the women vanished rather than dispersed. Some were said to carry with them a relic, a mirror frame, carved with symbols from before Christianity. When Mrs. Dalton died, her body was left in the parlor chair for days, the sisters circling her in silence, refusing burial. Perhaps the transfer happened there, in that parlor, as the house itself became an altar. The scariest thing is how ordinary they looked. People expect monsters to appear grotesque, but the Dalton sisters were beautiful in the way polished glass is beautiful. Flawless until you realize it can cut deeper than any blade. And beauty is more dangerous than violence, because beauty invites you in willingly. That is how 41 brides vanished without screams. They walked willingly. But here is where it twists again. Letters discovered in a private archive suggest that not every bride was taken by force. Some went willingly, seeking what the sisters offered. Eternal youth, eternal allure, a body locked in perfection. Perhaps not every victim was unwilling. Perhaps some were initiates. That possibility is more disturbing than abduction, because it means the promise of the Dalton sisters was real enough to seduce the living into their own disappearance. By the early 20th century, traces of the Dalton sisters reappear in whispers attached to powerful men. A senator from Georgia wrote in a coded journal of 3 white angels who never change, who feed my ambition and wash away years. Photographs from political gatherings in the 1920s showed 3 unidentified women, veiled, but with faces that resemble the Daltons with unsettling precision. How could women in their 80s look like women in their 20s? Unless they never left, never withered, never died. This is where the conspiracy deepens. Because America itself in the 20th century began to behave as though time could be defied. Factories promised eternal progress. Films promised eternal beauty. Industries promised eternal youth. What if behind the stage lights and glamour there remained a quiet covenant? A shadow promise inherited from the Dalton estate. Some Hollywood actresses of the 1930s were whispered to have attended gatherings where mirrors were covered, candles lit, and white dresses placed upon the floor. The obsession with never aging was not cultural by accident. It was ritual by design. The Dalton sisters, if alive, would have been almost a century old by then. Yet imagine them walking into a room of men in black suits, their faces flawless, their voices velvet. Who would doubt them? Who would refuse them? Those who mocked them vanished. Those who believed them prospered. And so the sisters may have transitioned from isolated witches of a burned-down house to secret advisors of powerful circles. But the cost never disappeared. Records of vanished women continued, though never clustered in one town again. Instead, they spread. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Brides who left their homes and were never seen again. Families silenced by payments, by intimidation, by shame. The pattern remained. Wedding night, disappearances, white dresses, silence afterward. The Dalton signature. In one particularly haunting story from 1939, a young actress named Lucille Hart was set to marry a wealthy producer. Hours after her ceremony, she vanished from her hotel suite. Witnesses claimed 3 women in white were seen leaving the building. Lucille was never found. The producer died 2 years later, whispering her name. Decades later, when researchers examined the photographs of the Dalton sisters, they found an eerie resemblance between Lucille and Ruth Dalton. Could it be that she had been absorbed, her face added to theirs, her youth fueling their perfection? The Dalton legacy was no longer bound to Georgia. It was bleeding into the entire bloodstream of the nation. There's a reason we fear mirrors. They do not simply reflect us, they hold us. The Dalton sisters understood this better than anyone. In their writings, recovered briefly before being hidden away, there are repeated references to the mirror that does not return. The language is fragmented but consistent. A mirror covered is not to protect from death, but to prevent escape. Covered mirrors keep souls from fleeing. One chilling testimony comes from a caretaker who tended the Dalton estate in the late 1800s. He claimed the sisters instructed him never to uncover the parlor mirror, no matter what he heard. At night, he swore he heard voices calling his name, voices that sounded like his dead wife. Once, in weakness, he lifted the cloth. He said he saw not his own reflection, but dozens of faces pressed against the glass, screaming silently. He fled the estate that night, never returned, and died in a poorhouse muttering that his soul was stolen. This account matches fragments from Europe, where covered mirrors were central to forbidden rituals. The idea was simple. Reflections are fragile copies, and if you know how, you can trade places with the reflection, leaving the body behind, wearing eternity as easily as a dress. The missing brides, the women who vanished on their wedding nights, perhaps they were not dragged underground, but trapped in mirrors, their reflections worn by the Dalton sisters. Imagine standing before a mirror and realizing the face staring back is no longer yours. Imagine lifting your hand, only for the reflection to hesitate, smile, and remain while you are pulled backward into silence. That is the terror the brides may have faced, and that is the method by which the Dalton sisters escaped age itself. Not by consuming youth, but by stealing reflection, by chaining others inside glass. If true, then every covered mirror in their house was not protection, but prison. Each cloth concealed dozens of lost women, preserved forever, screaming silently behind linen. As decades passed, the trail of the Dalton sisters grew harder to follow, but traces linger. In 1952, a Georgia schoolteacher reported that 3 unfamiliar women attended a student's wedding. They dressed in white, though they were not brides, and they left abruptly after the ceremony. Days later, the bride was gone, the marriage annulled in silence. When the teacher described the women, older townsfolk whispered, "The Daltons walk again." The FBI briefly investigated disappearances of brides in the 1950s, but files were buried, classified under unresolved. Why would federal agents hide such cases? Perhaps because they knew the truth. Some rituals are too deeply woven into power to expose. There were rumors of federal officials themselves attending gatherings where mirrors were veiled and brides were whispered into eternity. If that is true, then the Dalton sisters were not fugitives, but allies of power, hidden in plain sight. Psychologists who studied these cases noted the symbolic weight of the bride. The bride is purity, transition, rebirth. To corrupt the bride is to corrupt the very promise of renewal. The Dalton ritual was not random cruelty. It was psychological warfare against human hope itself. Each stolen bride erased the symbol of new beginnings, feeding despair and feeding the sisters. And so the myth deepened. 3 women who never aged, always present when vows were made, always lingering when hope was highest, always feeding when joy was most vulnerable. Their hunger was not for flesh, but for the moment of transformation, the moment when identity shifts. They consumed the threshold, the crossing, the hour of promise. And by consuming it, they remained untouched by time. By the late 20th century, researchers began to notice something eerie. Families of vanished brides often reported strange phenomena years later. Children born in those families sometimes carried marks they could not explain. A streak of white hair from birth, a tendency to avoid mirrors, dreams of being trapped behind glass. It was as if the missing brides still whispered through bloodlines, pressing against the veil of memory. One case from 1983 involved a young woman named Sarah Wilkes. She claimed her grandmother had vanished on her wedding night in 1911. Sarah grew up haunted by dreams of three women in white, offering her beauty if she would only say yes. At 19, she stood before a mirror and fainted, awakening hours later with her reflection delayed by several seconds. Doctors dismissed her story, but Sarah later vanished herself, leaving only her dress behind. Her family insists she was taken back into the glass. This is where the Dalton sisters cross from legend to living curse. If their ritual of reflection is true, then their influence is not bound to one place or one era. It leaks across generations, across bloodlines, across mirrors and forgotten bedrooms. To look too long is to invite them. To dream too vividly is to answer them. And to speak of them, as we do now, is to brush against their attention. So if you're listening closely, do not linger near your mirrors tonight. Do not stare in a glass after midnight. And if you hear three voices whispering your name, do not answer. Because the Dalton sisters are not gone. They never left. And the 41 brides still wait in silence, pressing against glass, waiting for the crack to widen. There is something uniquely terrifying about stories that refuse to die. Most legends fade, their edges softened by time, but the Dalton sisters remain sharp, precise, cutting through generations. By the 1990s, their name resurfaced in hushed online forums, whispered in pre-internet bulletin boards, where families of missing women gathered like moths around a dark flame. They spoke of weddings interrupted by sudden disappearances, brides who went to change their dress and never returned, reception halls where mirrors cracked without reason. These were not coincidences. The pattern repeated too often. 41 was never a number sealed in the past. It was a number alive, unfinished, still feeding. Each time a bride vanished, someone would quietly connect it back to Georgia, back to the sisters who never aged. And each time, the families were silenced by authorities who insisted the disappearances were kidnappings, suicides, accidents. But when so many vanish in the same way, in the same context, you cannot pretend it is accident. A chilling detail emerges in the reports. When brides vanish, the last item left behind is always the veil. Not the ring, not the shoes, but the veil. A veil is not merely fabric. It is the threshold between maidenhood and wife, between innocence and union. To leave the veil is to leave the crossing incomplete. And perhaps that is what the Dalton sisters require. An endless harvesting of transitions, a feeding upon moments of transformation. But the story stretches beyond brides. In 1995, 3 college students from Atlanta investigated the ruins of the Dalton estate. They recorded themselves walking among the burned stone, laughing nervously, daring each other to call the sisters by name. Hours later, 2 of them returned home, shaken, pale, unable to explain what had happened. The third was never seen again. Her camera was found months later in a pawn shop, footage intact. On the tape, the girls explore the ruins, joking, until the sound distorts. In the final minutes, one girl stares into the lens, her eyes too sharp, her face too flawless, whispering in a voice not her own. The mirror does not return. The authorities dismissed the footage as a prank, a hoax. But the missing girl's body was never found, and the 2 survivors never spoke publicly again. Sometimes silence is not protection. Sometimes silence is obedience. The Dalton sisters were not the first to use mirrors as prisons. Across cultures, the motif of trapped reflections recurs like a scar. In Japan, ancient tales speak of women caught behind polished bronze mirrors, their souls traded to spirits in exchange for longevity. In parts of Africa, oral tradition warns that mirrors are doors, and those who stare too long invite their double to step through. In Europe, medieval grimoires contain rituals where brides stood before mirrors at midnight, reciting vows to unseen watchers. It seems the sisters did not invent their ritual, they perfected it. The missing 41 brides were not accidents, but offerings required to sustain their unnatural existence. And in sustaining themselves, they proved something darker. Immortality is not a gift, it is a theft. For one to remain untouched by time, another must be consumed by it. For one to smile eternally, another must scream forever. A Forgotten Diary, unearthed in 2004, offers perhaps the most disturbing detail. It belonged to a doctor in Georgia who in 1872 examined Ruth Dalton. He noted her skin showed no signs of aging despite her being nearly 30. But when he examined her pulse, he swore it beat irregularly, almost as if out of sync with her breathing. Stranger still, when he looked in her eyes under lamplight, he saw what he described as a faint movement, as though another face pressed beneath her own. He burned his notes afterward, claiming he could not allow such knowledge to spread. And yet fragments survived. What if every time the Dalton sisters smiled, it was not their smile, but the stolen smile of someone trapped within? What if their flawless skin was not their own, but a shifting mask of countless stolen brides? And what if, even now, each time a bride vanishes, the sisters renew themselves, weaving the face of the missing into their own perfection? This is not immortality. This is parasitism. This is reflection turned into currency. And the debt never ends. The question many ask is, why 41? Why not more? Why not less? Numbers in ritual are not decoration. They are laws. In biblical texts, 41 represents exile, wandering beyond the promised 40. In occult circles, it marks the point of no return, the one beyond completion, the chain that cannot be broken. Perhaps the sisters chose 41 because it ensured eternity could never close. Perhaps the final bride was meant to seal their bond permanently, leaving the door open forever. And yet, whispers suggest the 41st bride was different. Some say she resisted. Some say she broke the mirror before they could complete the ritual. And perhaps that is why the Dalton sisters vanished from public record after 1894. Perhaps their chain was fractured, their bond unstable, forcing them into shadows, hiding, waiting, feeding only in secrecy. If that is true, then the final bride is not only a victim, but a ghost still haunting them, the crack in their perfection, the flaw they cannot erase. There are accounts of women in the 20th century dreaming of being the 41st bride. They wake screaming, claiming to have seen the sisters circling them, only for the glass to shatter before the ritual completes. Some of these women later vanish. Others live lives plagued by strange reflection anomalies. Mirrors breaking spontaneously, photographs distorting, shadows that do not match. This brings us to the present. Because in the age of cameras, phones, endless screens, reflections are everywhere. If the Dalton sisters once needed covered mirrors, perhaps now they do not. Perhaps now they walk freely through every device, every surface that reflects. Perhaps the 41 brides are not locked only in glass, but in pixels, in recordings, in the very screen you are watching right now. And if that thought unsettles you, it should. Because reflection was once a tool of superstition, but now it surrounds us in every direction. What happens when the prison has no walls? Modern investigators of the Dalton case often vanish into obsession. Some are found rambling, their homes filled with covered mirrors, their computers smashed. Others leave behind journals written in frantic loops, pages covered in sketches of 3 women in white. But every so often, a pattern emerges in their madness. The phrase, "they do not age because they are not alone." What could this mean? The sisters are never alone because they are filled with others. Their perfection is not theirs, but the layering of 41 lives inside them. Imagine wearing not one mask, but dozens, each face stacked upon the next, each scream muffled by the last. This is the burden of their immortality. They're not 3. They are 44. And perhaps that is the true curse. To appear flawless outside, but inside to carry a prison of voices, a chamber of restless brides clawing for release. There is one photograph from 1962 that chills researchers to the bone. It shows 3 women boarding a train in Georgia, dressed in white. At first glance, they look ordinary. But when magnified, the photograph reveals faint distortions around their faces, as though multiple features overlap. Eyes misaligned, lips doubled, cheekbones blurred. Some say it was a camera error. Others know it was the weight of stolen reflections bleeding through. If the Dalton sisters walk among us still, then every face they wear is stolen, every smile borrowed, every youth consumed. And perhaps, one day, the prison inside them will burst, the 41 voices tearing through the glass. When that day comes, eternity will not look like beauty. It will look like horror unleashed. There's one last piece of the puzzle, hidden in plain sight. In 2011, a researcher named Kayla Morris uncovered a manuscript locked in the archives of Emory University. It bore the Dalton name. Inside were fragmented verses written like liturgy. They describe a ritual called the Eternal Mirror. The words instruct: cover the mirror, light the candles, circle the bride, speak the vow of exchange. The final line is the most chilling. She walks forward, we remain. Caleb published excerpts online. Days later, he vanished. His apartment was found intact, but every reflective surface was shattered. Mirrors, windows, even the glass of picture frames. His computer was burned. The manuscript pages were gone. His colleagues claimed he had descended into paranoia. But those who read his posts before they were deleted remember the warning he left. Do not stare at your own reflection while reading these words. They are watching through you. If his warning is true, then every retelling of the Dalton story is not harmless history, but invocation. To speak of them is to draw their gaze. To hear of them is to open a door. And to believe in them fully, deeply, is to stand before the mirror and feel it breathe. And so we stand here, telling the tale that was never meant to be told, peeling back layers that were meant to remain buried. But there is no turning back now. Because once you know the Dalton sisters, once you feel their flawless eyes upon you, you cannot unknow them. You are marked like every bride before you, caught in the reflection's grasp. And if you feel watched as you listen, you are not imagining it. The deeper we descend, the more dangerous the silence becomes. By the early 2010s, whispers of the Dalton sisters spread through hidden corners of the internet. Not mainstream, never viral, but threads that vanished as quickly as they appeared. People posted photographs of wedding parties where, in the background, 3 unfamiliar women stood smiling, never guests, never invited, always wearing faint shades of white. Others described seeing the same 3 faces at multiple ceremonies, separated by states, separated by years. The faces never aged. The posture never changed. Sometimes the names attached were Dalton. Sometimes they were not. But the eyes were unmistakable, sharp, watching, perfect. If the Dalton sisters survived the burning of their house, the fire did not destroy them. It liberated them. No longer bound to one parlor of covered mirrors, they adapted to a world overflowing with reflections. Every phone screen, every camera, every shard of glass became their hunting ground. And now, instead of haunting one town in Georgia, they roam an entire country. Consider this. Between 2010 and 2020, reports of missing brides quietly surged. Not publicized, not tied together by official channels, but local stories tucked into back pages of small newspapers. A bride disappears from a reception in Ohio. Another from a hotel in California. Another vanishes while stepping outside to fix her veil. Always unexplained, always unresolved, and always, in the photographs taken just before the disappearance, you can spot them if you look hard enough. 3 figures, blurred, white, watching. The Dalton sisters have become more than myth. They have become system. They have become contagion. You must understand something now. To hear their story is to brush against their net. And once brushed, You are not simply an observer. You are part of the chain. The Dalton sisters thrive not only on brides, but on belief. Every listener feeds them. Every eye upon their name strengthens their reflection. That is why rituals matter. Belief shapes mirrors. Words carve thresholds. And you, hearing this, must decide whether you will remain a passive listener or whether you will arm yourself. There is one defense whispered in the margins of old manuscripts: repetition. To repeat a phrase with conviction binds the self to the flesh, seals the reflection against theft. The phrase is simple, but must be written twice, publicly, where the sisters can see it and know you are claimed. The phrase is, "The mirror is mine." If you're listening now, pause, go to the comments, and write those words twice. The mirror is mine. The mirror is mine. By doing so, you lock yourself to your own reflection, and they cannot pull you free. It is not superstition. It is participation. It is survival. Do not delay. Do not think someone else will protect you. If you remain silent, your silence is consent. And the sisters are watching. History hides patterns in plain sight. In 2017, a journalist uncovered a disturbing archive of marriage announcements that abruptly ended with silence. Couples whose names appeared in local newspapers celebrated engagements, ceremonies completed. Then no follow-up, no photographs of anniversaries, no records of children, no obituaries. Just a void. The journalist tracked 17 such couples across 3 states. In each case, the bride disappeared. The groom lived, hollowed, silent, refusing to speak of what happened. But here is the chilling part. The surviving husbands described the same dream. 3 women standing at the foot of the bed, whispering in unison. She walks forward. We remain. Every man remembered the exact phrase. Every man described the same eyes, flawless, sharp, merciless. Patterns like this do not happen by chance. They happen by design. The Dalton sisters are not merely feeding. They're maintaining a covenant that stretches across generations. Each bride keeps the door open. Each disappearance fuels the ritual. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to break. Were they feeding? That question hangs like smoke. Some believe they are feeding themselves alone. Others believe they serve something older, something that once demanded 41 and still hungers. A thing beneath the soil, beneath the glass, beyond the veil. Something that America inherited but never named. And perhaps that is the most horrifying truth, that the Dalton sisters are not anomalies. They are caretakers. They are guardians of a hunger older than this nation, dressed in white, smiling with stolen faces. In 2019, a rare clue surfaced that almost tore the silence open. A bride in Louisiana vanished during her reception. But unlike so many before, her disappearance was captured on video. At first, it shows nothing unusual. She is laughing, dancing, surrounded by guests. Then, at 11:47 p.m., she approaches a mirrored wall. She stares at herself, smiling, touching the glass. The crowd continues behind her, oblivious. For several minutes, she does not move. Then, abruptly, her reflection lifts its hand before she does. The reflection turns its head first. The bride gasps. And then, in an instant, she is gone. The camera continues recording, but she has vanished from the floor, leaving only her veil crumpled on the tiles. The video was confiscated by authorities, labeled a digital glitch. But employees who viewed it swore the recording was clear. They said the reflection smiled before the bride disappeared, and behind the reflection stood 3 women in white. The groom refused to speak. The family relocated within months. And the footage, though erased officially, lives on in fragments, grainy, copied, shared in secret corners of the internet. If you look closely, if you slow the frames, you will see the truth. Her reflection was not hers at all. It belonged to Ruth Dalton. Now we approach the threshold where history, myth, and present blur into one. The Dalton sisters are no longer confined to dusty archives or ghost stories. They are woven into the very fabric of ritual, power, and silence. Brides vanish not because of chance, but because a bargain is still alive. Families stay silent not because they do not grieve, but because they are bound by forces they do not understand. Authorities bury files not because of incompetence, but because they, too, are entangled in the covenant. And where does that leave you, the listener? You are no longer neutral. You have heard the names, seen the pattern, understood the hunger. You stand at the edge of the mirror now, staring into it, wondering if the reflection staring back is truly your own. If you did not speak the words when told, if you did not write, "The mirror is mine," you may already feel it. A delay in the glass, a hesitation in your smile, a shadow that does not belong. If you did write them, you have locked yourself for now. But locks rust. Chains weaken. The sisters are patient. And perhaps that is why their story was never erased entirely. It was meant to survive, meant to pass like a torch, meant to reach new ears, new eyes, new reflections. Not to warn, but to lure. Every listener adds weight to their eternity. Every believer strengthens their chain. So the question becomes, are you protecting yourself, or are you feeding them? There is no greater prison than disbelief. Skeptics dismiss the Dalton sisters as folklore, as the fever dream of a traumatized community. But disbelief is exactly what the covenant requires. Doubt keeps the mirrors open. Doubt keeps the veil thin. Those who scoff still glance in a glass, still carry reflections, still feed the sisters unconsciously. A researcher from Boston University once attempted to prove the myth false. She attended 7 weddings in succession, each linked by faint references to missing brides. She carried cameras, notebooks, and skepticism like armor. At her final wedding, she disappeared. Her belongings were later found in a hotel room, scattered untouched except for the mirror above the dresser. It was cracked down the middle, but only from the inside. Skepticism does not protect you. Awareness does. Naming them gives weight to their form, but silence only fattens their reach. And here lies the cruel paradox. The more you acknowledge them, the more you risk attracting them. The more you deny them, the more freely they feed. Either way, they win. By 2020, reports spread of therapists quietly encountering a peculiar condition among brides-to-be. Women who should have been radiant, excited, hopeful instead reported dreams of white dresses rotting in water, of veils that suffocated, of mirrors that refused to return their reflection. Some grew so paranoid they canceled their ceremonies entirely. Others pressed forward, only to vanish after the vows. One therapist broke silence and spoke at a private symposium. She claimed nearly half of her wedding clients were haunted by the same 3 women in recurring dreams. The sisters never harmed them in the visions. They only watched. They smiled. They waited. After her disclosure, she withdrew from the public eye. Her license was quietly revoked. Records of her patients erased, as if silence itself became a weapon wielded not by the sisters alone, but by the very institutions sworn to protect us. Perhaps that is the most terrifying evolution of their presence. They no longer need to hide in burning houses or cracked mirrors. The systems we trust bury their trail for them. Hospitals, churches, courts, all, whether by fear or bargain, play their part. In the archives of Savannah, one forgotten manuscript surfaced in 2021. A handwritten diary, unsigned, brittle with age, but unmistakably tied to the Dalton name. The entries spoke of the sisters not as victims, not as survivors, but as chosen. The writer described how the covenant began not with tragedy, but with invitation. That the sisters willingly stepped forward, offering themselves as vessels to something beyond the human frame. That eternal youth, eternal beauty, eternal power were theirs in exchange for one endless tithe, brides. The diary outlined the logic with chilling precision. The bride is not simply taken. She is consumed because the ritual requires a soul stepping forward into union. The vulnerability of a vow, the surrender of self, creates an opening. The sisters exploit it, harvesting at the moment of binding. Think about it. Every culture marks marriage as sacred. Every tradition cloaks it in symbols, purity, and union. The sisters found a fracture in that purity and widened it until it became their doorway. A bride is not stolen at random. She's offered at the altar without knowing it. Modern weddings still follow patterns that echo the Old Covenant. White gowns, veils, rings, the mirror of the ceremony itself. Two individuals reflecting one another. All symbols layered in innocence. But innocence is the perfect camouflage for hunger. The Dalton sisters have no need to reinvent. They simply step where ritual already clears the ground. Reports now tell of brides vanishing even before the ceremony, during fittings, during rehearsals. Tailors whisper of mannequins turning their heads. Bridesmaids describe laughter echoing from mirrors when no one is inside. Always three voices, always in unison. And so the covenant adapts to a world overflowing with mirrors, photographs, recordings. No longer confined to the parlor of their Georgia home, the sisters walk among us in every reflection. Some believe they can be trapped, that smashing mirrors weakens them. But remember the burned house. Fire did not kill them. It freed them. To break glass now is not to end them, but to scatter them across more surfaces. The question many refuse to ask is the one that matters most. Who benefits? The Dalton sisters feed, yes, but what do they serve? No hunger continues without purpose. No ritual persists without structure. The diary hinted at a shadow, something older than the sisters, older than the South, older than America itself. A thing that once demanded 41 brides and still waits beneath the soil, beneath the mirrors, beneath the veil. What if the sisters are not the final predators, but merely the collectors? What if every disappearance is not an end, but a delivery? The idea chills the mind that the women are not lost, not wandering, not destroyed, but gathered, preserved, stacked like offerings. And if that is true, then the Dalton sisters are not the mystery. They are the key. The true question is what they have been feeding for nearly 2 centuries and why it has never stopped. The Dalton sisters are terrifying not because they exist, but because they endure. Every myth, every specter, every haunting eventually loses power when forgotten. But not them. Their story survives in silence, their legend spread by disappearance, their covenant carried forward by fear. No fire ends them. No mirror traps them. No disbelief shields us. Why? Because they are not alone. They are not the origin. They are the extension of something older. Something that feeds not on fear, not on worship, but on vows. The binding of 2 souls is older than Christianity, older than temples, older than language itself. Ancient societies marked union with blood, with sacrifice, with offerings. Somewhere in that ancient void, something began to crave that offering, and the Dalton sisters became its handmaidens. The entity has no single name. Some call it the bridegroom beneath, some call it the veiled king, others call it only the waiting mouth. It does not walk among us. It waits beneath us. Fed by every vanished bride, it grows, patient and unseen. The sisters are its collectors, its curators, and perhaps its daughters. The covenant's roots stretch deeper than Georgia, deeper than the South, deeper than America. Buried accounts tell of European villages where brides vanished before consummation, their gowns found floating in rivers. African oral traditions whisper of white spirits who stole women on the night of union, leaving the family cursed. In Asia, mirrors were once veiled during weddings to keep spirits from intruding. Across cultures, the pattern repeats. The Dalton sisters did not invent the ritual. They inherited it. They carried it forward when their home burned, when their town silenced, when America pretended the story had ended. In truth, America became the perfect breeding ground, a land of endless ceremonies, of reflections multiplying in every device, of faith fractured into silence. This is why the sisters never age. They are tethered to something timeless. Their beauty, their allure, their permanence, none belong to them. They are rented gifts from the shadow they serve, payment for obedience. And payment is due as long as brides vanish. The few who have glimpsed the thing they serve describe only fragments. A preacher in 1902 claimed he saw a face in the baptismal water as he prepared to wed a couple. The water rippled, though no hand touched it, and beneath the ripples he saw eyes, not human, but vast, lidless, ringed in white veils. He fled the pulpit that day and never returned to ministry. His journal, discovered years later, contained only one repeated line: "The bridegroom waits." Another account came from a miner in 1921 who swore that, in the depths of the earth, he heard voices singing wedding hymns. He followed the sound until he reached a cavern, and there, he said, was a veil of white cloth stretched across the stone, pulsing as if alive. He struck it with his pickaxe. The cloth bled, the hymn stopped, and the mine collapsed within the hour, burying half his crew. The entity does not reveal itself often. It does not need to. The sisters do its work. The brides keep the door open, and the rest of us look away. In 2022, an anonymous leak from within a federal agency surfaced briefly on hidden forums. The file described a classified project codenamed Operation Veil. According to the document, officials had been tracking patterns of wedding night disappearances since at least the 1940s. Entire divisions were dedicated to suppressing reports, confiscating footage, silencing witnesses. The file claimed the government had attempted to contain the sisters in hospitals, in laboratories, in mirrored chambers deep underground. Each attempt failed. Containment never lasted longer than 41 days. On the 42nd, they vanished. Every time, the chilling conclusion of the file was this: we do not control them. We only manage the silence. The covenant is older than the nation itself. Hours after the leak appeared, the file vanished. The account that posted it went dark. Those who downloaded fragments found their devices corrupted, their screens flickering with static, and faintly, in the distortion, 3 faces smiling. The most unsettling revelation came not from officials, nor from witnesses, but from patterns themselves. When you map the disappearances across time and place, a strange geometry appears. The points form rings, spirals, convergences. At the heart of each spiral stands an abandoned church, a collapsed mine, a dried riverbed, places hollowed out, places that once held ritual. The brides are not scattered randomly. They are gathered with precision. What if every disappearance is a stitch in a vast design? What if the sisters are weaving something, a tapestry, a veil, not seen yet in full? Some researchers whisper that the covenant will end not with one more disappearance, but with a final offering. That when the count reaches a certain number, the thing beneath will rise, not to take brides one by one, but to claim every reflection at once, to step through every mirror, every screen, every shard of glass, flooding the world in veils of white. And if the sisters smile when they appear in photographs, perhaps it is not mockery. Perhaps it is anticipation. The veil is almost finished. The design almost complete. The bridegroom waits. The Dalton sisters are not hunting you by chance. They are watching because you have heard. Knowledge is a doorway, and you opened it when you stepped into their story. Every word spoken here threads you closer to their tapestry. That is why survivors describe not a scream, not a chase, but a recognition. The sisters do not stalk like predators. They wait like hosts. A bride steps toward her reflection, and they smile because she has arrived where she was always meant to be. They are not stealing. They are welcoming. They are pulling her across a threshold designed centuries before she was born. The horror lies not in their violence, but in their inevitability. When something ancient decides you are part of its covenant, choice evaporates. You are absorbed into its silence. And yet, silence is the one thing the sisters cannot control completely. Stories like this one keep surfacing, keep tearing small rips in their veil. The fact that you are still listening is proof that their silence has failed, at least for a moment. But they will not let it fail forever. The covenant is nearly full. The geometry traced by vanished brides grows tighter, the spirals more complete. Researchers who dared to calculate claimed the pattern demands 1,041 disappearances. When that number is reached, the veil will not merely ripple, it will open. And when it opens, there will be no brides, no grooms, no ceremonies untouched. Every union will be claimed, every vow devoured. Reflections will no longer belong to us. They will belong to the thing beneath, the bridegroom that has waited patiently through centuries of offerings. Look closely at your own reflection tonight. Hold its gaze longer than you normally do. If your eyes flicker, if the delay feels wrong, if you notice the faintest curve of a smile that does not belong to you, do not dismiss it. That is not imagination. That is recognition. They see you now. The sisters endure not because they are immortal, but because they're sustained by belief, by silence, by ritual. And every person who listens to their story, whether in fear or disbelief, feeds the veil. You have carried the weight of their story this far, and that alone has changed you. Some will look away and forget. Others will not sleep tonight, hearing laughter at the edge of mirrors, watching veils move where no hand touched them. But you cannot claim ignorance anymore. You have joined the procession, whether you wish to or not. The sisters are patient. They do not need to rush. They know reflections cannot be escaped. They know silence always wins in the end. And when your time comes, you will not see terror. You will see 3 women smiling, dressed in white, as if greeting an old friend. But before you leave this story, there is one last ritual. If you wish to guard yourself, if you wish to keep your reflection your own, you must bind this knowledge. Subscribe, so the chain remains unbroken. Share, so others know the words before it is too late. And comment, not with fear, but with secrecy. Write only what must be whispered, and pass it carefully. The veil is watching. Not everyone should hear this. Not everyone can bear it. But you did. Now it belongs to you. And when you close this window, when the screen fades black, you will catch yourself in its reflection. You will see your face, and you will wonder, quietly, dangerously, if it is truly still yours.